It's certainly on the home stretch when it comes to equipment use. This particular site that's going to have a container barn and small camp, we're just getting you the daily progress. I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. So what we're looking at here is 4 corners. Now I use blue paint because that's what I had. Usually this is going to be orange paint. And I'm standing in the middle of an earthworks terrace. You'll notice that the size is significantly smaller because we've made some design adjustments, as I've talked about in the previous video, where we had a problem, and that problem was being solved by adjusting the size. You can also see the earthworks is significant in size, and it provides for us access all around our core area. We've actually reduced the size to 20-foot containers to address both the solar aspect as well as the depth when it comes to this location. I wanted to make sure I could maintain access across the front of the containers, as well as a significant perimeter around the containers. Now, when you're designing your site, you'll have to make decisions like that. But today we're going to focus on making sure that this site is level. So we have these pins in place. And while the grading is being finished, I will be measuring level contour between these pins. The only part of this site that is absolutely level is the gravel pad, and these corners represent that gravel pad. So the gravel pad itself is going to be under the containers. It's going to provide us airflow and drainage under those containers, and ultimately deliver for us, at least on this site, a pretty stable platform for a barn. Now remember, this is an earthworks for agricultural purposes, and I'm not just saying that as a disclaimer. If we were going to build an actual house and there was going to be a concrete pad here, it would be a little bit different construction. While the construction here allows us to put a pole barn over top of the containers, it's not really meant for an actual house that's going to have furnishing and things. It's going to be an equipment barn and storage, lockable storage for our animal feed and fencing and tools and equipment associated with that project. And then I'm not going to modify the containers other than putting a false wall in one end to allow us to open and close it. The other container is going to be just the way it is. But as you can see, and it's probably about 9 o'clock in the morning, that we got our north-south orientation good. Now this particular location, I can't even calibrate a GPS, the compass on a GPS or a phone, because there's a significant amount of iron ore underground, and not necessarily like enough to mine or anything, but there's definitely some geomagnetic disturbances all throughout the property. And that is something I noticed on my initial surveying, is that the north-south items, it just was crazy sometimes. And that's why we use both GPS and we use other math like triangles in order to make sure this spot is level. So what are the important lessons? What are the important takeaways? First off, this platform needs to be compacted, heavily compacted. Now, the majority of these stakes are on original soil. So the earthworks wall here is compacted and built, but the rest of this is typically the original soil. So we can still put sonotubes or other footings in place for our pole barn. Another factor to consider is our continued access to the space and water management. So you can see that there's a road here, and we have, beautiful tire tracks showing that we're bringing vehicles in and out, but we still have some rocks and some leveling that needs to be done. All these rocks are going to be picked up, put out of the way, and saved for either a natural wall or some natural building projects. We have a significant amount of rock in this location, and so we're just getting that out. You can see the piles on the other side over there. When it comes to water flow, we have 2 distinct areas. So on your design plan, you're going to have your gravel pad. Your gravel pad exists in the earthworks, and then you're going to have your access road, which exists separate of the gravel pad, and water that lands on the access point and water that lands on the gravel pad neither the two shall meet. So we have a separate drainage pattern for our road versus our earthworks pad area. Now, the reason we do that is because we don't want, on a big rain event, the water from the road coming down and washing onto our earthworks terrace. A dry terrace is a stable terrace. And so while the pad provides us about 6 inches of gravel and will help drain from underneath the containers, that water we need it to soak into the ground. And we need it to soak into the ground on this side of the earthworks so that that water can get deep underground before it puts any pressure on the back of that earthworks wall. Any lateral drainage, especially on the surface, will go this way, and it will go this way, which is off the sides of the earthworks. That's very important in your design. Any lateral drainage from a graded road, because your road's going to be slightly higher in the middle, is going to channel along the sides of the road and then have exit points before sharing some of the lateral drainage of the earthworks and after the earthworks down there towards the bottom. So again, big rain event happens, puddles of water, whether it's while we're building the project or when the project is done and all this is grassed out, the water needs to go slowly and surely down a path that it moves, you know, slow. I mean, it's gonna not wash anything away. We don't want trenching and such, but ultimately can sustain the usage of the space. So after this pad is in place, we're gonna do the final grading and seeding and putting down straw, and all that's gonna happen even before the containers come. And then this pad, the way it's set out, when the containers come, they're gonna bring a fifth wheel down through this way, and we need to have that stable ground in place. We can't control if the container's coming in from Norfolk, Virginia, and it's taken 5 hours to get here, and then it's raining by the time they get here. They need to be able to park that container, and then this road needs to dry up quick before it can go to the site. Now, do I want to gravel this road? Well, our design plan has a courtyard space, and that courtyard space is so early in development that dumping rock on this road is not desirable. So this is going to be one of those roads that's going to have grass on it. It's only going to be used during the dry seasons. If it's wet out, I'll park the vehicle at the top of the road where it's more stable, and I'll walk in. That's important because we don't want a muddy mess. We want this to be stable. We want it to run for quite a while. Now, the gravel pad itself will be just a standalone pad in the middle of nowhere, and that pad will have the containers on it, and that pad will have probably a camp kitchen area, and then there's a couple areas that we could set up a tent when we're out here camping. But essentially, the access to that barn, because it's centrally located, because it's on our grid, we'll be able to get to it by a variety of means. In fact, that pad right there, we have stable access through the woods. So there's a trail over here, and we have stable access from the other side, which has the wood chip and shredded materials. So I can enter the top and drive around the other way. These design considerations are important because your access may be temporary in the scope of establishing your small farm or homestead. And if you go and do permanent infrastructure, which is very often done on a construction project, then we'd be digging up this gravel later. So we have our pad in place. The height of the pad allows us to make this whole site that level if necessary. It's not likely, but if necessary, we can do it. The pad is not too far below the general grade, so we're not drawing water onto that surface space. And then we, of course, have all of our topsoil out on the side here as our moisture and sediment management. Because when you do something like this, by the way, you need to be mindful of the sediment management. If we had a pour down rain today, the site needs to be stable enough that we're not losing any soil. And here's an example of those rocks. These are rocks that came out of the ground that we set aside. Some of them are suitable for foundations in the natural building courses that are coming up in our area. Others are the rocks are too soft. But we don't want these rocks in the fill. We want a uniform stone. It's number 357 road base is going to be our primary foundation that goes into our the pad. And if you were here in a course or as part of the project, you would see all the minute details, and we'll go over those details at another time. But the road base gets compacted into the clay, and then once the clay doesn't take any more road base, then we come back and we put a number 57, which kind of just locks those stones in place, and we're going to end up with a solid pad that we can park vehicles on. This is perfect for your farm parking lot, for extending the space in front of an existing building, for the general design of a road, because if we were going to gravel this road, we would get a box. It would basically come through here with a box grader and give us a 6-inch depth with a small, about 2-inch elevation in the middle. And then we could drop rock over top of that, do the same thing, track in the road base, and then after that, lock it in with the little bit smaller rock. Now, these are much larger rocks than you would as a driveway. And so when you're hiring contractors, if they're thinking driveway rather than farm road, then you're going to end up with those little tiny rocks that don't really lock in place. While it has good drainage, you're going to be constantly picking those things up in your tires. So we're looking at forestry roads versus residential roads, because a forestry road is going to have a rock that's big enough that's not going to get all tied up in your tire. Now, you will have some because, you know, the rocks don't come in a absolute uniform size, but these are design considerations. So again, when you're watching this program and you're taking notes, and all of these podcasts are going to come together into a instructional program that's part of the Earthworks program that we're teaching here in Ridgeway, Virginia. But if you're going to develop farm roads and it's costing $600, $700 a load for just the road base, and I'm going to go and put a road in from all the way up there to all the way back here, plus the pad, that's cost prohibitive for a beginning farm. You're looking at maybe $15,000 in rock alone, because again, you put the road base in, probably 3 to 4 inches of road base, and then over top of that, you're putting in your smaller stone to lock it in place. Plus, this grade would need to come down. It would need to be more level. You can get away with a farm road that just has grass and that you don't drive on during wet seasons. So a compacted earthen road can be managed over time. But if you're running four-wheelers back here, if you're on four-wheel drive all the time, if you're running on it when it's wet, you will end up with a muddy mess. And that's where farms run into a lot of problems, because when they end up with a muddy mess, they start getting cheap fill material. They don't properly manage the road. They end up having wet spots that sit and soak and cause, so there's minerals under the ground, and the water coming through dissolves the minerals and ends up with sinkholes. We don't want those problems, and we eliminate those problems by design. So this road is good enough for a tandem dump truck to come in and drop off materials. We verify that with the operator, as we mentioned in the previous programs. So we don't need to make this road perfect. We just need to make sure, and this is the final part after we get the gravel pad in, we just need to make sure these bumps and humps are out, and that the road kind of has a little bit of an arch and a defined drainage, and then gets grassed in. You can grow grass on this compacted clay if you give it enough time and you give it a little bit of topsoil. Now again, we reserved our topsoil so I can dust the road. We may or may not dust the road right away, but I can dust the road and get an erosion mix in here, get a couple cycles of an appropriate cover crop or appropriate pasture mixture. Because again, I don't want lawn to mow. I want appropriate, durable Virginia native grasses in here to give me a foundation to move equipment, people, and activity across. If there's no problem with parking up that way, you can see my truck through the woods. parking up that way and then walking down here to get things out of the barn or to move animals and such. We want minimal impact on the land. We want maximum utility of the land. And those two things have a certain level of balance that we need to be aware of. So again, a farm road, perfectly acceptable, but the foundation needs to be absolutely right. When the foundation is absolutely right, we drop the containers on it. I still need to paint the containers, seal the containers, and then we start storing stuff in them. And so on a dry day, I can pull my truck up right in front of the containers. I can put things in, take things out, and then get back into the agricultural use of the land. When we have animals on the land, when we have fence to repair, when we have other activities going on, if we do this part right, the earthworks, we do this right, it's an investment that'll pay dividends for a lifetime. There won't be major repairs or maintenance necessary. There'll be a significant amount of biomass growing on this space to get us those deep roots that we've talked about in other programs, those deep roots that are going to hold the soil. And then, of course, we'll have better drainage as grass systems come in place. So I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead, and this has been another update of our container barn. If you're looking to build something like this, we do have a full set of plans available. We have material lists. A lot of this program is about modulation, modules, building it in modules. And then also it's a multi-phase plan. So once this series is complete, we're just going to have 2 containers on a gravel pad. And you might think it's just put down some gravel and drop some containers, and that will work for the short term. But again, we want holistic management. We want long-term plans. We want programs that are going to be here for the duration. So as this farm is developed, as this is a generational resource, the buildings will just still be here. We won't have to spend $8,000 to $10,000 for containers that we can lock equipment up and then have to replace them in 5 years. Because again, we'll have a program in place for management, and all that is written down, and we can teach it to you. So again, if you're interested in earthworks courses, just for the terracing, as we've shown you in a couple videos, that's useful to get more use, to grow on sloping land, to provide places for additional infrastructure, and even to get access and start using the land before major clearing. So you can see all these trees are still here. We didn't have to clear the whole site in order to get started with the use. If you're interested in that, you want to visit www.prosperityhomestead.org. There's no fancy landing page or sales pitch. Just go to the contact page and ask about our Earthworks course. If you're interested in this entire series, you'll find on the same website some kind of like featured articles that are going to show you the segments of the work here. This is a project plan like we describe on managing land projects. It comes in phases. It has clear definitions of start and finish, and it's something you can do. Once you understand the core concepts of what we're implementing here, this is something that is repeatable. In fact, there's several farms in this area that are going to have similar projects set up, and if you want to be a part of something like that, stay tuned for more information and more details. And then finally, if you have any questions, just go to the comments. Now, these videos are syndicated on BitChute, Rumble, YouTube, a bunch of different platforms. It's always better to visit www.prosperityhomestead.org to ask your questions. But all your questions will be answered, and I try to answer them in follow-up videos, as well as our podcast and articles and other content that I help create for our affiliate sites and our partners in this kind of adventure. Regional food is more important than ever before. Unfortunately, to start a basic farm, it can be $500,000 to $1 million. We want to help you not have shortcuts, but ultimately phase into the project. It's still going to cost you $1 million to get started, but don't let that discourage you. There are ways to start gaining maximum value from your land, and I'm going to show you how. We'll have a number of demonstrations here, including the container barn. And I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. Looking forward to hearing from you soon.